And I want to welcome the audience also this time for our show. It's called 30 Minutes of Faith. And so in this 30 minutes, we talk about all kinds of faith. It's not one particular faith, but like we promote interfaith and we want to, bring people awareness about different topics. And today my guest is, for the second time already, Reverend Dr. Jean Dupuche from Melbourne, Australia. And he is a big scholar in many, many, many fields. And today our subject will be Kashmir Shaivism. And so the first question was, because on my research, I found that there are not many teachers, but then we already discussed there's a difference between teacher and guru, and maybe John, you would like to go a little bit further into the issue with the teachers and the guru.
Yes, it's a very important distinction, because in our Western universities, we have very, very learned people who know all about a subject matter. That's fine. They have intellectual knowledge. They're very clear. They've read a lot. That's fine. But it's all in the intellect. It can just be in the intellect. Mm-hmm. Not only always, but it can just be in the intellect. That is their role. They teach ideas. In the guru, though, has a different role. He's much more like a spiritual father or spiritual mother, or starets in the Russian style. Someone who's a spiritual guide, who can certainly teach the tradition. That's one of their important roles. But they also communicate the tradition. They don't just talk about it, they communicate it. And so because they themselves are immersed in it, heart and soul and spirit and body, in the tradition, then they can, you might say, from their very persons, communicate and radiate the tradition into the disciple whom they choose to have. So they perceive the value of the disciple who comes to them asking to be taught. They perceive the value of the disciple. They will test the disciple. They may even make things very hard for the disciple, but to test them. And once they've found that the disciple is worthy of the tradition, then they will teach, not just teach ideas, they will communicate the whole reality of the tradition. So from soul to soul, spirit to spirit, mind to mind, body to body, the whole tradition is communicated to the disciple, and the power of the tradition, the impact of the tradition. So the disciple now becomes filled with a sense of conviction and truth and awareness and power. So it's along those lines. Mm-hmm. So they're very different.
And but you said, like, now we have a problem because there are not many gurus left. Or
you see the tradition flourished 1,000 years ago, and then it died out, and so the communication line, the tradition disappeared. That is the tradition of from guru to disciple who becomes guru, to disciple who then becomes the guru, and so on. That communication, that line, died out for various reasons. It was rediscovered in the 20th century by a very famous man called Lakshman Joo. Mm-hmm. But it's questionable whether he considered himself to be a guru in the traditional sense, or even whether he initiated disciples in the traditional sense. He did to some extent. There's the famous Dr. Bettina Bäumer, who was an Austrian lady, and she was a disciple, and in some sense he initiated her. But when he was asked who will be his successor, he refused to name one. Mm. And he said, well, Shiva, God, Shiva will provide. And so there are many others who do claim to be gurus in the tradition, but one always questions a little bit. There's certain doubts about to what extent they are really gurus in the strict sense.
And so were you in your lifetime able to actually be taught by a guru, or how did you attain your knowledge?
Well, now, that's a very good question again, extremely good question, Heike, because you see, in the tradition, one can be initiated by a guru, but that's a lower level of initiation. It's still pretty good, but it's a lower level. It's when the goddess herself initiates someone spontaneously, without need for a human guru. That is a higher form of initiation. And I suppose I would like to think of myself as having in some sense been initiated, to use the language, it's only use the language, by the goddess, in the sense that when I read a text, then things would start to spin in me, start to dance in me, a great excitement would occur, a great resounding as from the depths would occur in me and almost in my ears, but certainly a great resounding occurred in me. And I think because the words were, if you like, allowing the goddess, to use the language, allowing the goddess to move in me and to inspire me so I would see myself in some sense, I must be very, not say too much about, not claim too much. Mm-hmm. I would say in some sense, I was initiated that way. So there's always in me a certain wish to find a guru who initiates me, and then also not wishing to have a guru, so that I would be initiated more profoundly and more silently and more interiorly than depending upon someone who lives and talks and walks.
I once heard the Dalai Lama said, after he was being asked who would be his successor, that he said, we don't need any gurus anymore, because it's now the time where the spirit speaks directly. And so maybe you were actually one of the persons who don't have to have a guru anymore, because you were initiated directly by the spirit, the
yes,
goddess.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. I didn't know the Dalai Lama said that, but I'll keep that in mind. Thank you for that information, because I think he's quite right. I think people want more and more to be initiated in that way.
And also because I think we have so many teachers and so many gurus and there's so much knowledge out, especially now with the internet. If one really is seeking, the answer will truly come, I believe. But sometimes people, they just want to have a guru, just like the Jewish people wanted to have the golden calf, to not be studying for themselves, but just like follow somebody and through his wisdom, thinking that they are being blessed as well, which is kind of a lazy disciple.
Yes,
in a way.
Yes.
And so I was reading still, because like last time you just said, there's like, what is really like the main, if you have to really make it very short, like what is the main message of the Kashmir Shaivism? Yeah, what is the central point?
I think it would be to come to bliss, Ananda, so bliss. The bliss that is a divine bliss that is experienced, which is beyond this world, beyond time, but also at the very heart of time and the very heart of the individual. So I think, to put it in a nutshell, I think that would be the highest aim of Kashmir Shaivism, to reach bliss in the very rich sense of the Sanskrit word Ananda.
But in the end of the day, isn't that like the wish of all of us to have bliss? But then if you have the luxury of being in a remote, island or somewhere where you can meditate and you have not the noise of the world. But here I am in the middle of Berlin. I didn't sleep last night because like the kids are like screaming and yelling, partying on the streets. There's so much noise, so much buzz, and I want to experience this bliss, and but it's very hard for me to really go deep into it. So,
absolutely. Modern life is not conducive because of the pressures of modern life. But the teaching of Kashmir Shaivism would also be that a person, once they become awakened, they will experience bliss in the very depths of their being, no matter what happens. So the distractions and the puzzlements and the noise will not prevent them from maintaining a sense of bliss at the very depths, because the bliss does not depend upon outer circumstances, nor is it prevented by outer circumstances. So that the bliss is attainable in the enlightened person in any condition or circumstance. So that's the value of bliss, when it is truly found. It doesn't depend upon anything.
Yeah, well, then I still have a long way to go.
We all have a long way to go.
It says also like detachment from negative emotions. But how do you detach? Like, so what do you do then when you find yourself in circumstances where there's too much buzz from the outside? You want to be blissful, you're not quite there. What would you suggest the person to do?
Well, I think it's very simple business of being patient. One must be patient. And this is very ordinary teaching, but it's, I think it's very true teaching, that one does one's best. It sounds very ordinary, but it is ordinary. One does one's best, and one's patient. And of course, the more a person develops their awareness and sensitivity to the grace that is given to them, then they can be in prison. They can be out on the streets. They can be deprived of anything, but they retain essentially this state of peace and equanimity. That is the goal, and one must work towards it.
But
and of course, often the practitioners will put themselves into situations of stress, so they're called austerities, or penances, if you like, or austerities, and they will put themselves into difficult situations so as to be able to focus, or learn to focus, to become more sensitive to what is true in them. So they'll do long fastings. They would do all sorts of very difficult austerities that would afflict the body or even the mind. But they do that precisely in order to strengthen their sensitivity.
But would you think that it is in general harder for people in the West to really dive into that than people from the East? Also, you know what I'm trying to say? Like,
yes, I think probably as a sweeping statement, yes, it would be more difficult, because I think in the West we've become so materialistic, so consumerist, so rationalist, so driven to success and productivity, that we are framing a culture which is hostile to the spiritual dimension. And therefore, it is much more difficult to attain spiritual depth compared to a society where perhaps the tradition of spiritual growth is still strong.
I thought so too, because like I'm talking now from like a Christian and the missionary field, and we always want to go to the poor places and preach the gospel, you know, where people are in poverty. But my idea is, in when people have lack, they usually know the voice of God, because they have to depend on it, because they don't have provision for month and month. They have to live daily. But I think more like the people here in the West, where we have everything, what you just said, you know, we don't hear God's voice anymore. Like we don't want to hear it, because why would we have a need? So I think, yeah, it is probably really easier for people, who are not so spoiled.
I mean, Jesus does say, "Blessed are the poor."
Exactly.
Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor," and I think that's the first of the Beatitudes.
Yeah.
His first sentence of his first sermon is, "Blessed are the poor, truly poor, poor in spirit, truly poor." And I think he knew very well, how striking and how upturning that particular statement was, because in our day we think blessed are the rich.
Exactly. And we promote that. Everybody's striving there. We want to win the lottery. We want to have riches and billions. It's now not about millions. Now it's about billions. Now you have to be a billionaire. It's ridiculous. It's really ridiculous. Another question I have to say. He said something about, in this interview that I was reading, or this research I was doing, that we have to build up nadis, chakras, and energy. Can you tell me about what are nadis?
Well, nadis are channels, and they are lines of energy in the body. So there's a whole system from experience. It's experiential. It's not anatomical. It's experiential. That in the body, there are all sorts of currents and movements of energy occurring in the body. And the person who develops his spiritual practice will find that these channels radiate throughout the body and bring bliss to every point of the body. So, for example, John of the Cross, to talk about John of the Cross, so a Christian writer, a Catholic author, he says the same thing, that when the divine grace comes into a person, then it will go through to the very tips of the fingers, the very edges of, the very tips of the edges of the body, so right through the body, even to the fingertips. And so that's the idea of these nadis, that they are the channels by which all sorts of energies and bliss and healings and positivity and relaxation and feelings of happiness. So I think we all experience, when we're very happy, we start to dance, because the body wishes to move into this happiness. So the body itself becomes full of happiness, not just the heart, but the very limbs become happy, and so on. So it's this idea of the chakras then are energy centers of the body. They're a little bit different from nadis or channels. These are centers.
Sorry to interrupt. So the difference is that nadis are lines, more lines, like they go out, and then the chakras are different junction points.
Different junction points, and from those junction points, the channels come. So the chakras are the centers from which radiate the nadis, or the channels. So it's a radiation. It's like from a flame, or the light streams from a flame. So the chakras are like a flame, and the nadis are like the streaming light that comes out from the flame. And so there are different centers in the body, and there are many different books that number different chakras and put them in different places. But for the last 100 years or so, there's been a focus on 7 chakras, 6 or 7 chakras, which are located at various points along the spine. So from the very base of the spine right through to the top of the head. And there are different junctures then. And these, even our ordinary language will show our awareness of chakras. So we speak about the heart. You know, someone speaks from the heart. The heart is a chakra. The stomach is a chakra. And someone could say, you know, they feel butterfly. I don't know, it's in English, you have the phrase butterflies in the stomach. When a person is anxious, then the stomach reacts. Or when a person is confident, then they feel the confidence in the stomach. So there are different emotions or different awarenesses associated with different chakras. Or St. Paul speaks about St. Paul, the apostle, speaks about proclamation of the faith which comes from the throat. So the throat is a place of clarity. When a person proclaims, which is to make clear, then that they are purified by their proclamation. So the throat is purified and purifies the whole person when the faith is proclaimed, and so it goes on. And then we have the lower chakras as well, which the perineum, and then the sexual area. So they too have their energy levels, and the purpose of meditation is to awaken the chakras one by one, or all at once if you can, but anyway, sometimes one has to start at the beginning, and to awaken a chakra. And one chakra will start to awaken and function, and then an awareness appropriate to the chakra occurs in the person. Then when that chakra is awakened, the next one starts to awaken.
How do you know your chakra is awakened?
Because you know. When you know. It's like when your heart starts to move, for example, it's a very easy example. When the heart starts to move, you know. You know when something's heartfelt, you know it, don't you?
Yeah.
You know it. When you have fear, you know it.
Yeah.
When you have courage, you know it. When you have the sense of
insight,
magnificence of God, of plenitude, you know it. So it is experience. Experience tells you. Nothing else can prove it. It is directly experienced. Because proof is not necessary when experience is given. Proof is only necessary for those who don't experience. But for those who experience, proof is irrelevant.
Because it's already there. But
because it's known.
But for those who are not self-confident and doubt themselves, they might have it open, but they think there has to be something almost supernatural happen for it to really be open, but actually it's already open all along.
Yes, so they need to be taught. They need to be taught.
Yeah.
Sorry, they need to be taught. So if someone doubts themselves considerably, even though the chakra is awakening and functioning and moving, then they need to spend more time being aware of it. They need a teacher. This is where you finally need a teacher. In the whole spiritual path, people need a spiritual guide. So if a person reacts in the way that you mentioned, you described, then if they had a spiritual helper, would be able to say to them, now, wait a minute, pay attention, be aware, just be simply aware of what is happening to you and acknowledge it and deepen your sensitivity to it. And but assess it, because there is assessment involved here. There's no naivety. There mustn't be any naivety in this field. So a person needs to discern, not presume that what is happening to them is necessarily good or necessarily bad. They've got to start to discern the value of what is happening to them. And this requires wisdom. So the more a person becomes wise, the more they're able to discern the value of what happens to them.
Very good question. How does a person become wise?
Well, I think the whole spiritual path is a process of becoming wise. So it takes time and all sorts of qualities of soul. So patience, commitment, detachment, a whole range of virtues are needed for. So there's no easy fix. This is a demanding path to follow.
And a lifelong path, probably.
A lifelong path to follow, yes.
Yeah.
But an exciting path, and the only one that is really, in the long run, worth
living.
Yes.
Exactly. Here it says, 1 second, in the Kashmir Shaivism, there's 112 methods. What does the person mean with this?
That's a book. That's a book, the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra. It's one of the books, and an excellent book, just fantastic. And it lists a number of methods of coming to this state of divine awareness, and a whole range of things. And so they list 112 of them. Brilliant, quite brilliant. There's a German translation and commentary by Bettina Bäumer.
Oh, okay.
Bettina Bäumer. Excellent, perhaps one of the best, perhaps the best that I've read. It's in German, so it's readily available.
Also
in
for
German.
me.
Yes, but there are translations in Italian and French and English and probably other languages as well too.
So this would be like a really good book if you want to really find out anything or a lot of things about Kashmir Shaivism. This book would be.
I would recommend it as a starting point. Yes, excellent.
Okay.
Excellent.
Yeah, and what does he mean by Bhakti devotionalism? What is that?
Right. Bhakti means devotion in Sanskrit. And so you have your deity, Shiva, Vishnu, Ganesh, whoever your deity might be. I'm talking in
Jesus.
Indian terms now.
Okay. And ours would be...
Well, of course, in Christian terms, it would be Jesus. And there's this devotion then. So one keeps the deity in mind. So one would keep Jesus in mind. One would express one's faith in Jesus, one's love for Jesus, one's commitment to following his path, wishing to be with him, wishing to follow wherever he may lead, even if it's into places that might be difficult, to follow his commands, even though at times they are very demanding. So this devotion then to the person of Jesus or whatever deity, so for the Hindus it would be Vishnu or Krishna, and therefore to take on their character, to feel one with them, to be devoted to them. So in those fashions.
So not just
now the difficulty that I have with devotionalism, is that it doesn't necessarily, but it can involve a separation from the devotee to the one to whom one is devoted. So there's a separation. Whereas in Christianity, as in Kashmir Shaivism, the separation ceases. The idea is that it ceases, that one is no longer separate from or other than, one is identified with, one is one with, so united with. And St. Paul says this. St. Paul says in Galatians, I live, or rather not I, but Christ lives in me. So this idea of being in, Jesus is in the Father is in Jesus, the Christians are in Jesus. This whole idea of being in, which removes these separation that can be there sometimes.
And I think this is our problem still today, that we are still, not we all, but like that some are still very separate. They see really God or goddess or any higher outside of them as something to be feared and dreaded, and we have to be good, otherwise we won't make. They don't see that the spirit is living inside of you. And so here comes my question. I don't know how much longer time we have for our interview, because it seems like it's almost half an hour over, but I'm just gonna ask quickly. One of the questions I have about the Catholic Church is the role of the Pope. Even I think the word means bridge to God, but wasn't Jesus, didn't he come to rip the veil from the bottom, from the top to the bottom, so we don't need any bridges anymore, because the Spirit lives inside of us? And kind of like what we talked earlier about the Dalai Lama saying we don't need any more gurus. Why do we need a pope?
Well, the word pope comes from the Greek word father.
Mm-hmm.
So it just means father.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm called a father.
Mm-hmm.
People call me father. So it's just a Greek word. Now, it's never used in official documents. The word pope is not used in official documents. So just to come on then, what is the role of the Pope? The role of the Pope is to make sure the unity of the Church. It's a function. He is there to not to be the bridge between God and humankind. That's Christ's role.
Yes.
He is the mediator between God and ourselves. The Pope's function is to maintain the unity of the Church, to maintain the truth of the gospel, to make sure that the gospel is preached according to the tradition. So he has a role of teacher, certainly, in the sense of making sure that what bishops and Christians generally say is in keeping with the gospel and with the tradition of the Church. So that's one of his roles. And then also to maintain unity. So in times of dispute, he is there to bring people together. And so his bridge is not between God and ourselves, but bridge between us, you and me and the rest, so that we cease to be enemies and opposed to each other, and that we come together. So you brought up the word bridge because his official title is Pontifex Maximus.
Yes.
Which means a bridge builder. So the bridge is bridge builder, Pontifex, bridge builder. And it's he is there to make bridges between Christians or Catholics and people, generally speaking. That's his role.
And now here comes a question which I don't know. On my in my earlier studies, I've been also like on this path for quite some time now. So in my earlier researches about the celibacy, I came about an article, and I don't know if it's true or not, but it kind of made sense. It says back in the days, a Catholic pope, or not pope, a Catholic priest was allowed to marry. He was allowed to marry and have children, and everything was just regular. And then because at one point there was a very, I guess, rich bishop, and now after his decease, his sons or his children, they wanted to have the inheritance, but the church says no, he worked for us, so it's us. So that's kind of like when they came up with this law of like, if you want to work for us, or if you want to be a priest, you cannot marry anymore. But, and I don't know if it's true, but it kind of makes sense a little bit. But out of this not being able to marry, as also like out of not being able to live out your sexuality and you know, wie heißt es? You know, to multiply and what is the word? Appropriate?
Increase.
You know what I mean?
And multiply. Yes.
So now the suppression of all also this energy, the sexual energy, I think here now we have this big dilemma with the molestation of the children. And what I find really difficult is how the Pope and the Church deals with this. That they, it's I think for me it is a lot of people are turned away from the Church because the Church is so inactive. Why is it that they turn kind of the blind eye to this really troubling issue?
Yes, well, there's quite a few things to say there, Heike. I think regarding the history of the rise of celibacy, it's a long history which I think it is somewhat connected to the laws of inheritance in medieval Europe, as you described. But we need to talk about that more at length, all to do with the purification of the Church in the early Middle Ages. But that's a long story. I think to make the point that the Pope, because he does have legislative role in the Catholic Church, he could change the law of celibacy tomorrow with a flick of the, with the signing a document. Could be changed tomorrow with a stroke of the pen. So there's no obligation in Christianity or in Catholicism, for that matter, for priests necessarily to be celibate. It's a law that has been brought in a long time ago now to solve a real issue of the selling, all sorts of issues.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a long story to say in a few minutes. When it comes to the question of the molestation of children, all this we've been hearing about so much, that's a very complex issue and is much more to do with power than to do with sex. This is being acknowledged now. It's the molestation is to do with the exercise of power, and
the
not
power
pleasure.
What of the molester towards the child?
They want to exercise power. This is well recognized now, but this is a big topic, Heike, and I'm not quite sure we could deal with it satisfactorily in 2 or 3 minutes.
That is
but
very
I think
true.
that there is the question. There is the question was raised really recently with the synod on the Amazon, whether there was a big synod 2 or 3 years ago of the bishops of the Amazon, whether they should make it possible to ordain married men of good standing, ordain them as priests. So that issue is not the question of married clergy is not a problem, theoretically speaking, in the Catholic Church. And
it's not a law from God that we
have
to be celibate.
Nothing like that.
It's nice if you want to be and you want to devote your life, only to God and not be married. That's your choice, but it should not be mandated. And here comes again, and I don't even know if you're up for a third round, because there's so much that I really would like to talk to you about. But now I know the time is already, like, they probably cut us off in a couple of seconds. So yes. I want to...
No, I'd be very happy to have another meeting with you. That'd be very... I'd enjoy that.
Even I want you to become my teacher. Because there's so much I can learn from you. Even in the Kashmir Shaivism, there's still so much. And so thank you for your time. And so I guess we have a date for our third interview.
Yes,
the talk continues.
The talk continues.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much.
Good
Have
night.
a good day. Bye
Yes,
bye.
thank you. Bye.